Today, I am going to be talking about authentic freedom. Freedom is a word that is often used, and it different meanings for different people, and perhaps even different times during the day. There can be, for instance, freedom to do whatever you want at any given moment. You can want freedom to have the power and the right to do what you want, not only just doing whatever you want, but it is your right and you have the power to do it. And maybe other people don't have the power to do it, and it's not a problem because then you have more freedom. The third is being able to drop obligations that we have towards others. Either we feel, or the persons that have this feel that the obligation limits them and their freedom, or that their freedom lets them drop the obligation regardless. So these are misunderstood ideas of what freedom is. These are based on the idea that there is a separate self-sustaining ego, self, soul, some kind of an entity that is separate and independent from other human beings, from the environment, from the world, that there really is no interdependence. Then there is the question, if you're taking that approach, well, how much freedom is enough? How much freedom do you need in terms of your daily life? You have to have the freedom to, shall we say, ignore a red light when you're driving, ignore the speed limits, ignore what the other people on the highway are doing or the street are doing. This attitude that I'm more important than other people and my freedom is more important than other people and their freedom, this leads to domination, discrimination, oppression from a very small localized scale to a global scale. And it leads to thinking that freedom is a limited resource. There's only so much to go around. And so you better get yours while you can. The more freedom I have, the less freedom somebody else has, or vice versa. The more freedom somebody else has, another group has, then I have less freedom, and therefore I will suffer. And all of this is a misunderstanding of freedom, what it really is. Basically, these are taking self-interest to be freedom, to pursue our own self-interest. And this is really not freedom at all. What it is just being free of consequences and responsibilities. And this approach just leads to a very cold approach to life. Authentic freedom sees the interdependence that we have with each other, with the environment, with the world, with animals, and so forth. It also includes an authentic view of ourselves and our connections. Quote, if we acknowledge our interdependence and take into account of the vast network of interconnections which our lives and our actions are embedded, we will find out that our own freedom is inseparable from the freedom of other people. And this brings to mind the metaphor that is found in Hinduism and also Buddhism, and it is the net of Indra. Indra is a Hindu god, and net is a series of knots and then twine going between the knots. The knots are made of the twine, and every knot in the net is connected to the other knots through these twines that hold the knots together. So the metaphor is that the net of Indra encompasses everything, and everything is interrelated. And so it is with freedom. Our freedom is interrelated with the freedom of other people. Now, there are conditions for freedom, and there are outer conditions for freedom. But it is the inner conditions that are the basis of freedom. This is where it originates. And no matter how good our outer manifestations of freedom are, if we don't have this inner basis, we will not be free under the best of conditions. It just doesn't work that way. Now, our mind has unlimited potential. There are really no boundaries to our mind. we are the ones that limit our minds. You might say, thinking that our mind can only handle so much, or it can only understand so much, or focusing on all the little trivial things in our lives and thinking that this is it, that there's nothing beyond that. But because of our Buddha nature, we have the potential for our mind to become incredibly vast. I can't recall the exact prayer, but it goes something like, may my mind go as far as the limits of space and to the limits of being's karma. In other words, it's pretty limitless. And in fact, this limitless nature of mind, we can see it. This also means that there's no limit to greed. There's no limit to anger. There's no limit to all kinds of negative emotions. Just for instance, in 1965, I Googled this, the richest man in the world was J. Paul Getty, and in today's dollars, he had about $8 billion. The richest person in the world. Nowadays, that's peanuts. Elon Musk and Bill Gates and some other people have passed the 100 billion. Musk is over 300, pushing 400 billion. And it doesn't seem to have satisfied him. He hasn't decided to take a cruise around the world for a few years and relax. This is the way it is. So this, in a way, gives you an inkling of the fact that our mind is limitless. On the other hand, if we have this inner freedom, then even under difficult circumstances, we can have outer freedom too. If we're bound by our kleshas, our habitual patterns, and trying to establish territory, we'll never be free. And if you're searching for genuine happiness outside yourself as an external experience, it won't happen for long. If you're not happy before you get what you want, you won't be happy afterwards, at least not for long. Now, the internal approach is, and I like this, this is another very neat short Karmapa quote. If we feel free, we are happy. And if we feel happy, we feel free. They are interdependent. They're two names for very similar experiences. Both start internally, and it is the mind that experiences them. To go back to some of these misunderstandings about freedom, here are some expectations that really are not realistic. One is to remove yourself from the connections and responsibilities that you have towards others, maybe go out into the middle of the woods or the middle of somewhere out in Montana and disappear in a cabin all by yourself. This doesn't work because our connections are part of who we are, and we can never be completely successful at it anyway. If you think about it, you go out there to the cabin, you build it. Well, where did the technology come about to build a cabin? It came from our ancestors. Tools that you use, where did they come from? We can't do everything. We have to use things that come from other people. And even if you're totally successful at that, you still are breathing in the same air that everybody else is, drinking the same water that everybody else is, and sharing a little piece of earth that everybody else is. And the environment is not your special environment in your cabin. It's the environment of the area. You are fooling yourself if you think that you could just get away and completely escape from others, from society, and so forth. Another misunderstanding or faulty understanding is controlling others and controlling external circumstances leads to freedom. This is something that's very common today, and it isn't like it just was invented in the past few years. If you get a strong leader, perhaps a dictator, then that person will take care of making sure that things go the way you want them to. And it might only be the dictator that feels that way. I came across a poem that I will read here. I believe it is about Ramses II, the Egyptian pharaoh. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal, these words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my work, ye mighty, and despair. No thing besides remain. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. So even if you can have, you might say, domination for a little while, it's impermanent and frequently doesn't even last as long as you live. The Tibetans have a term for freedom, and Gyawan Karmapa translate it to mean self-control or self-mastery. And he says there's a Tibetan saying, being in control of oneself is happiness. Being controlled by what is other is suffering. Self-control brings happiness. Without it, we are controlled by outer forces. On top of that, we're usually not even aware that we are being controlled by outer forces. There's a reason why there's so much advertising around, because they are trying to influence what you buy and all kinds of decisions of yours. Basically, if a person, an organization, a government can control your emotions, they can control you. And one of the big ones is fear, fear of an enemy. The enemy might be living in the town that you're in. Who knows? But anyway, fear is a huge problem, and it seems that it's very easy to just keep stirring it up and stirring it up and stirring it up, and therefore control people and get them to do what you want them to do. Again, this goes back to we have to be able to control our own emotions. It just doesn't work the other way around. Our mind must be free in order for us to be free. And we also need a stable mind, a mind that isn't jumping around all over the place. We use our Buddha nature as a starting point in training our mind and to be free. We understand that we have this underlying Buddha nature, which is unchanging. It cannot be lost. It can't be degraded. It can only have superficial stains. And so we base on that starting point, we then train our minds. We tame it first and then train our minds to be patient. When we start understanding how destructive our emotions can be, then we develop a much stronger desire to liberate ourselves from these destructive emotions. And you might say, start working much harder to free ourselves from them. Anger is one of these destructive emotions. Its basis is finding something unpleasant and then wanting to get away from it. It could start with irritation, but as it gets stronger and stronger, then it gets to be frustration, and then anger, and then hatred, and then maybe even the desire to eliminate that person or that group of people or whatever it is that's causing you to suffer. On the other hand, anger hurts the person that is angry more than the person that the anger is directed at in most cases. An angry person can't get away from the anger. It's there all the time. The thoughts are churning, they're unhappy, and the person that they're angry at may not even know that this person is angry at them. There also is a word that has entered, or a new definition for a word that's been in the English language a long time, and that's a troll. And that reminds me of an experience I had when I was a prison chaplain. We would have Christian volunteers come in Sunday in the late afternoon and lead two Christian services. And this Sunday, they called in at the last minute saying that they could not make it, canceled. And I decided that I would lead the service. And I did. As a chaplain, that's part of my job. I grew up Lutheran. I know a lot about the Christian service. Well, the next day, an inmate came into my office and said, "You have no right to lead that service. You are a Buddhist monk." And I said, "I'm the chaplain. I can do it." And then he shot back at me, "No, you can't, yada, yada, yada." And I told him, "Yes, I can, yada, yada, yada." And we went back and forth like that for a few minutes. And I kept getting more and more agitated. And he kept getting more and more agitated. And finally, I just said, "Get out of here." And I got angry. And of course, he had to get out because if he did, security would have come and dragged him away. He went to the door, and as he was passing through it, he turned on me, pointed his finger, and said, "Gotcha." That was his reason for coming to begin with. He wanted to be a troll and show that he had some power. And in that case, he did. On the other hand, there's a Tibetan saying that says your worst enemy is your best teacher. And he was a very good teacher at that point. I never had that experience happen again. We have to realize this, that a lot of people out there maybe would be happy if they knew you were angry. Basically, anger is like drinking rat poison and expecting the rat to die. So these are reasons why we need to tame the klesha of anger. Desire is just wanting to own things, possess things, people, objects, ideas, knowledge, experiences, take your pick. You see what you don't have and you don't see what you do have. It doesn't lead to satisfaction. It leads to wanting more. The classic analogy is it's like drinking salt water. It just leaves you more thirsty. So if we think about it and realize that if we just experience what we have fully and completely, we can find a lot of happiness in and contentment in what we have. It doesn't mean that you don't acquire new things. You acquire them because you need them rather than you need a new acquisition. It's two very different things. The third is ignorance. And this is basically willingly turning a blind eye, not seeing it, denial. There's an elephant in the room, and of course you don't see it, but you do see it, but you're not going to admit that you see it, that sort of thing. It also could be concentrating on trivial things to avoid the more important things. I find it interesting in all these government hearings that have been going on for the past few years and these depositions and so forth. It's amazing how many people say how many times I can't remember or I don't remember. It's like there has been an epidemic of stupidity that came across the leaders of this country and their assistants. But anyway, all of this causes stress, mental turmoil, emotional and physical health problems. And you've lost your freedom and it increases your suffering. Of course, it's avoidable, and wanting to avoid this kind of pain and suffering is the motivation for self-mastery or self-discipline. Fortunately, this kind of discipline doesn't involve force or coercion. It's really very simple, Buddhist discipline. It is to refrain from harming yourself. It is to refrain from harming other people. We also add to that actively doing things that benefit ourselves and things that benefit other people. One of the most important things that you can do actually is to develop a joyful mind rather than one that is filled with burdens, the burdens of life, whatever that means. One of the slogans in the 7 Points of Mind Training is always have a joyful mind. It's amazing how difficult things get done and get done fairly quickly if you have a joyful mind. And if you don't, if you have a mind burdened with things and feeling sorry for yourself or whatever, how long it takes to do a simple task. My experience at work was that the people that complained the most about work did the least work. And the people that were very efficient generally did not complain. This requires mind training. It requires our minds to open up, to see new possibilities, to again understand that our mind is limitless and that we can let go of things, that we live in this very small world that we have created, but it's our own creation, and the security we feel in this little small world is based on ignorance. It might be a painful, secure feeling, but it's a familiar pain. We know it, and it feels much better than the unfamiliar. What this means is we have to see beyond what's happening in our lives right now, kind of get beyond what's immediately going on in our lives, what's going on in our minds, and what's going on in the external world. We need to have a broad view, to have a certain non-attachment. Trungpa Rinpoche would use the term aerial view. If you can kind of see from above a much bigger picture of what's going on, you have more clarity. I was thinking of maybe nowadays the term would be a drone view. When you see from a drone, you see a lot. Or if you zoom in on the satellite pictures that are taken, you see a lot. You see a bigger picture. You see there's more going on than what this little thing is in your life right now that you're all stressed out about. Ideally, you could step back, that is this non-attachment, and look at what the problem is from more of an observer rather than a participant. And when that happens, then we start seeing that we have more power than we had thought we had. We realize, and we can remind ourselves, that no one else is in control of our minds, that it is our mind, and we are capable of controlling our mind. It's very good, in fact, from time to time to remind ourselves of that I am in control of my mind if I work at it. Nobody else is controlling it. Keep thinking about that. So this inner freedom is not shallow freedom. It's not like following impulses or letting go of following the rules. Freedom is rooted in wisdom. It involves the intelligent application of discernment combined with a sense of contentment. And that is really important, this idea of contentment, which is basically appreciating what we already have. We have a lot that we can appreciate if we really contemplate it and investigate it. I've seen this happen at Christmas time, and perhaps I was a willing participant in this behavior when I was a child, but I think adults can fall into the same trap. Sometimes I think adults are just complicated children, in fact. Anyway, the scene is, it's Christmas time. The Christmas tree has been set up. All the presents are under the Christmas tree, and now it's time to open them. And of course, the kids are all excited. They rush over to the tree, grab a present, find one that's theirs, open it up, probably tearing off the paper. Then they see what it is, they set it down, and they grab the next present and tear it off, look at it, set it down, grab the next present. Finally, they can't find any more presents. Then look at the parents and say, is that all? If we start paying attention more to what we have, we'll find that we can have a lot of contentment and satisfaction with what we have. Again, I'm reminded of my grandmother who grew up on a farm. Born in 1895, she would talk about her older brothers and their horses, their buggies. This is when, they are late teens, early 20s, and they're going to town horse that they would never hook up to a plow or another farm implement because they wanted them spunky and looking good for everybody. And This would have been rough by our standards. No central heating, would have been wood heat, no insulation, no. Well, let's put it this way. My house, I had the original windows and it was built in 1895, and you could always tell which direction the wind blew, because if there were curtains, the curtains would be moving. And if there weren't curtains, the room on the windy side would be colder. And of course, no electricity, no internet, certainly, and no cell phones. And Grandma was talked very lovingly about how much she liked growing up on the farm. So then you raise the bar of what is comfortable to where we are today. And even that isn't enough. We need more. We need, take your pick. There's always something else that is needed. But if we could appreciate what we have, it's just so much easier, so much less stress. This actually is contrary. Wanting to have more and more and more rather than appreciate what we have is contrary to the way things really are. And we can't have it all anyway. So our outer actions of body, speech, and mind influence others, and we want to influence others in a good way. And our well-being is influenced by others as well. And it's good to acknowledge that too. As I was saying, this net of Indra type of relationships within our family, within our neighborhood, within our community, all the way up to countries and the global community. The influence is usually subtle. It's not necessarily obvious. On the other hand, we feel better if we influence people in a positive manner. Happiness is circular. If we send it out, we feel better having done it as opposed to complaining. And frequently, it comes back with interest. We get more than we gave. If we look at how our actions affect others and apply wisdom and this self-discipline, the choices are greater and easier, that there are many ways to be happy. I was reminded yesterday of a situation that I was in, and I can't even remember where it was. But a small boy came up to me in my robes and he said, "Are you Jesus?" And I said, "No, but I'm a carpenter." I don't know how that made him feel, but I'm sure some other people, like the person that told me of this story, got a big smile out of it. So even silly little things like that can spread the happiness. On the other hand, here is a personal story. I moved out to this farmstead back in 1971. And pretty soon there was a horse on the property. By the next year, I believe there were 2 horses on the property. And by the 3rd year, I think there were 5 horses on the property. It's nice riding horses. It's nice petting a horse. Nice to look at them in the barnyard or out in the pasture. It looks very rustic. But there's a downside. They need to be fed every day. They need to have fresh water every day. Then you've got to make the hay. And then there's always the manure. And you can't just take off and leave them for a day or a week. Someone has to be there. And eventually, I realized that there were much easier ways to be happy. I could just go for a walk. I could just enjoy the view, sit on the back deck and enjoy the view. But so much of our life is like that. If you look at what you are doing to be happy and how much is behind doing that to be happy, and maybe there are simpler ways of being happy. In this country, and I think this is spreading, we have this idea of thank goodness it's Friday when it comes to work. I'm not sure what the saying is about Monday, but the idea is, oh, whew, I've got the weekend off. Whereas if you had a different attitude towards work, you could find that work also has some joy and some freedom in it. You don't have to separate your work life from your recreation life. You don't have to relax on the weekend, escape, unwind, divert your mind, and so forth. You can just go inward and find happiness and find freedom. You'll also be freer at work. And you may even improve the work environment for your coworkers. Here is another quote: "Neither freedom nor happiness is dependent upon enjoying one particular set of external conditions or having one particular experience. Freedom and happiness as opportunities are not one fixed thing." In other words, there's lots of things that a person can do that can bring happiness and can express freedom if we really open ourselves up to this, as opposed to thinking, I have to do this, I have to do this. And then you're really limiting what you do to express your freedom and to have happiness. You don't have to just, I'm thinking of a person, I'm not going to name them, really likes to go to museums. Going to museums and also going to Broadway shows. Well, there's a lot more ways to be happy besides those two. There's nothing wrong with them, but you can be happy in between the show and in between the museums. You can be happy when you wash the dishes, when you clean the house. This does not limit your happiness. On the other end, if our mind is not free and wisdom is absent, then it becomes a big problem. Not much happiness there, and there's not much freedom. Also, this is slightly related, but I'm kind of going off in a little different direction here. We don't miss our connections, or we don't see our connections with other people frequently. And when we buy online, it becomes even more obvious. We're missing the big picture. You buy online, you never have any connection with a human being. It's all machine, all software. And then a few days later, something is delivered to your door. Maybe if you lived in the city, it's delivered later on in the day, and you might not even see the delivery person. The other day, I bought a big jar of mixed roasted nuts, and I read the label. First of all, the company is headquartered in Austin, Minnesota, a relatively small town. And the company is the same company that makes Spam. So the company is located in southern Minnesota. The ingredients listed sources from a large number of tropical countries. One of the nuts might have been produced in the United States. So by buying these nuts and eating them, I'm touching people in Vietnam, Brazil, Indonesia, just to mention a few. I'm not going to go down the whole list. You're not just touching one person, you're touching a group of people, a company. Someone has to plant them, take care of them, harvest them, process them, and then put them in packages, ship them up to the States, where then they will probably mix them up into the mixed nuts, maybe roast them, and on and on and on. And all the way along the way, more people are in contact with this. Then there's the machinery that is needed to do all of this. It gets very complicated when you get into the production, the machinery needed for the production, the processing, the harvesting, the fuel, and then the marketing, the warehouses, the transportation by truck across the country, and on and on and on. And all the people that is touched by this probably have families. They need food, clothing, and shelter. They spend the money. Other people gain from that money, and on and on and on. You're touching, you might say, the whole world if you want to analyze it in great detail by buying a jar of nuts. But you don't see that unless you look deeply. But this shows you how much we can influence other people in our, let's say, choice of products that we buy and where we buy the products. My sister was married for a few years and her husband came from New York City. Blackberries were in full season here. I would go out and graze, just, I wouldn't pick them and put them in a container and take them into the house. They wouldn't get that far. But he, having been in New York City all his life, he was afraid to eat them. You have to buy them in the store where they're safe. This is, again, another example of how you can just miss the bigger picture of what goes into bringing these foods to the store or other items that you find in the store. Clothing could be the same way. So the future is full of choices, and if we have some wisdom, some clarity, we can step back and have this aerial view. Our minds open up, our hearts open up, we become freer inside, freer on the outside, and things just plain go better. We feel better about it, better in our interactions with other people, and so forth. Wisdom will also tell us what's beyond our reach, when to quit striving for this because you are causing yourself more misery and you'll never attain that goal. Now, I'm going to talk about my own experience. This is the Karmapa's words. We are capable of doing much more than we give ourselves credit for. That's an important thing. Don't sell yourself short. That has been my experience. All of you have been here to the shrine room that I'm giving these teachings in. The building is made out of stone. I had never built with stone before, but I got this idea way back, long before I was involved in Buddhism, that I wanted to build a stone building. And I did it. It's 2 stories high, and it's a very nice building. It works very well. I've remodeled it, repurposed it since I first built it. But I could have given up at any point and said, oh, this is too much work, or I don't know what I'm doing, da, 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 da. But if you keep at it and you're realistic about it, it's amazing what we can complete. I did talk with other people that were more experienced with me, and I read some books about it too. So we are interdependent beings, and we need to take others into account. Freedom can help us understand our equality. And actually, these great bodhisattvas, they would put others above them, even in terms of importance. For instance, Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, I went on a couple of trips. Well, this one was the one where I had the most contact with him. It was with a group, of course. It wasn't just Rinpoche and I. But at one point, he said that on a previous trip, he had gone over to Nepal with something like $300,000 to buy statues and other things for the monastery. When he got home, he didn't have enough for cab fare. Another trip, I went to Rumtek, to the Shedra there, and when you walk into the main entrance, there was a plaque on the wall with the names of the people that were the biggest donors. I can't remember if Rinpoche was the first of the list or if he was second, but he never talked about that. But he obviously sent a large donation to the Shedra. This trip that I mentioned at the beginning of this, we stopped in Delhi and had an audience with Tai Situ Rinpoche, and Rinpoche talked to him in Tibetan. But there were some problems, and they obviously talked about the problems. And then after that discussion, Tai Situ then addressed the rest of the audience and said, well, what I told Khenpo Karta Rinpoche was to sponsor Mahakala soaks. Well, the next day, or maybe 2 days, we got on an airplane and flew up to Kathmandu, and we didn't get more than settled in our accommodations when we got in taxis and went to a monastery. And then we had a conference with the abbot, and pretty soon Lama Karma opened up his Lama bag, and a large stack of money appeared as an offering to the abbot. Everything was done in Tibetan, but I guarantee he was sponsoring a Mahakala. So then we went to the next monastery, repeated it. Went to the next one and repeated it. For Rinpoche and a great bodhisattva, they're concerned about benefiting others and see others as more important than themselves. If we can see others as equal to ourselves, we're doing pretty good. So this is important to remember, that seeing yourself as being above others contradicts interdependence, and it contradicts the fact that we all have Buddha nature and our Buddha nature is equal. Now, the outer conditions do have a role in increasing our freedom. Again, we have to free our own minds first, and that is mainly internal work. This protects us from the external forces. I think a good example, I talked about horses a little earlier. A skilled horse person can be on a horse at a gallop and the horse shies, which means suddenly moves to the right or the left very quickly and still stay on and maintain their balance. So it's a bit like that. As we develop more and more inner freedom, even when outer circumstances might throw you off and you could end up in a very negative place, making very negative decisions, you are not thrown off. You don't lose your mental stability. It is important to tame our minds, train our minds. And if we're going to work for the benefit of others, and there are a lot of groups and people that could use some help, whether it be in this country or in other countries, we need to be able to influence others and influence change in a very positive way. A good foundation of inner peace is extremely beneficial. When I first came in contact with Buddhism, I was studying with Chogyam Trungpa's Sangha back in the late 80s. And I remember people then would say, if you don't clean up your garbage before you try to clean up the world's garbage, you'll just create more garbage. And that's a good way to sum this up. If we don't have our own inner freedom and we're trying to work for the freedom of other people, that a lot of times we're not necessarily going to make a dent on the problem. We might change the problem slightly, but we're not really going to have much positive effect on it.